to the webinar to launch the network in their first comprehensive incarnation. So we have about 50 or so people registered. We have about 30 online at the moment, and we appreciate your time this afternoon to join us on what's been what is quite an auspicious occasion, and a lot of people put a lot of effort into getting it to this point, and I really wanted to acknowledge some of those. For the proceedings today, what we'll start is with a bit of background and context to the maps, and then we'll give you a live demonstration of the maps, which is probably what most of you are most looking forward to seeing, and then we'll open it up to question and answer. So as we go through the presentation and the live demonstration, you should see on your dashboard for GoToWebinar, there's a little panel where you can ask questions. We encourage you to write your questions there, and we will respond, and we may even ask you to put those questions once we unmute you to the listening audience. So at this stage, I should introduce myself. My name is Chris Dunstan. I'm a research director here at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS. I'm the project director, and I'll step through the background presentation in just a moment. And I thought you'd see that there are at the end of this webinar.
I'm research principal here, and I'm managing this project, and I'd like to
Thanks, Ed. So with no further ado, I think we'll go straight into the presentation. You have the chat function there and the opportunity to ask questions, and those questions can also include if you're not seeing what you should be seeing. And at this stage, you should see a picture, well, apart from seeing myself, you should also see the screen there for the slides. And in a moment, we'll click to full screen on the slides, and we'll take it from there. So at that point, we'll go to the presentation. Difficulty in hearing it, also please pipe up, and we'll see if we can assist you. Okay, so the network opportunity maps. When we started this project, we saw it as a major data exercise with some significant collaboration involved. And as we've worked through the project, we've realised that it's actually a really major collaboration project with a significant amount of data management. And that's actually quite appropriate for a project like this, because the ultimate objective of the network opportunity maps is to encourage effective collaboration between consumers, the providers of the network service providers, and other stakeholders within the electricity sector. And that's, I guess, what reflects the subtitle here, that it's essentially about informing effective collaboration for decentralised energy. The overview, as I said a moment ago, was to give you a little bit of context to the project and emphasise why it's got why we believe it has such an important role to play in the transition that we're seeing currently in the electricity sector in Australia. Then we'll say a little bit of detail about the project itself, and then move on to the live demonstration and open up to discussion, and then just a little bit at the end about the future of. So in terms of context, hopefully everyone can see the full slide here. it's pretty clear that the decentralised energy revolution has arrived. It's got a long way to go, but the impacts are already pretty significant. And there's a number of elements to this, and perhaps the most obvious of the decentralised energy revolution at present is the impact of solar PV. But probably an equal impact that's being had already, but is not being as obvious, is the impact of energy efficiency, and I'll illustrate that in a moment. Other dimensions to it, the rise of energy storage and battery technology, the rise of electric vehicles, and the rise of smart energy management, all of which illustrated here, may have in future as big an impact on our electricity system as PV and energy efficiency has already had today. So we're really at the beginning of a massive transformation. This slide here illustrates the impact that's already happening. So what I've got here is simply a slide from the National Electricity Forecasting Report, which was released in June of 2016 by AEMO, and you can see here that, if I can show with the pointer, my mouse, that overall electricity supply through the main grid is expected to be pretty flat over the next 20 years. And in fact, over that full 20-year time horizon, it's not expected to reach the levels that we achieved in 2008, 2009. So while there's been a lot of press about peak oil over the last 5 or 6 years, it seems that over the same period we've actually passed through peak grid without really noticing it. But what's also interesting about this table is that the underlying demand for energy or energy services is continuing to grow. It's just that it's being soaked up by decentralised energy instead, in 2 dimensions in particular here. One, through solar rooftop PV, and secondly, through improvements in energy efficiency or energy productivity. These 2 wedges here, both key elements of the decentralised. So this is a fundamental change to what we've seen over since the beginning of the electricity sector. But the transformation is more far-reaching than that. If we go to the next slide. While the amount of grid energy is expected to remain rather flat, at the same time, over the next 5 years, we are planning to absorb an additional 16,000 gigawatt hours, or about 8 or 9% of the current electricity supply through the grid in the form of renewable energy, new renewable energy. That's about 5,500 megawatts over that 5-year period. And the bulk of this new renewable energy is likely to be wind energy, and that means variable, as illustrated here by this graph, which daily output from wind energy across the national electricity market over a 2-year period. So it's nothing new to say that wind energy is a variable output supply, but as that becomes a more significant component of our electricity system, that variability will become a more important issue to deal with. The other key renewable that's solar, of course, which is in its own way just as variable as wind energy. And we can see that in the blue curves here. This is just over a week period to illustrate the obvious variability in solar generation. So The impact of solar is already being felt not just in mopping up underlying growth in demand, but in the time stamp or the time profile of that supply. I've illustrated here the Californian Independent System Operator, their equivalent of AEMO, of the impact of solar on the supply curve in California. And as you can see here, the increasing supply of solar PV in the grid is hollowing out demand in the middle of the day, which they've indicated could lead to what they call an overgeneration risk. That is insufficient demand to soak up the generation in the system. But perhaps more importantly, ramp of about 13,000 megawatts over over a few hours. That's a real challenge for the system as a whole, and also for our networks. Sorry, if we can go to the next slide. Now, if we look at the impact on maximum demand, which is what drives the overall capacity required in the system, networks and generation, again, we're seeing a quite unprecedented picture. So as of the most recent forecast, for the first time, we're seeing declining forecast of peak demand. It's pretty flat, but there's a slight decline over the next 20 years. So whereas in the past, that growth in peak demand was the key driver for investment in the grid, that driver has essentially disappeared in New South Wales and in most other states. But again, for the first time, it's not just maximum demand that is interesting in understanding these impacts of decentralized. To the next slide. This is where the duck curve that we showed you a moment is impacting on. So for New South Wales, we actually see reduction in minimum demand, and quite a significant reduction over the time horizon of the forecasts. And in fact, we are seeing demand shifting from overnight, where it has been to the middle of the day because of the impact of solar PV. And this, in fact, is already the case in South Australia. If we go from New South Wales to Victoria, then that forecast reduction in minimum demand is even more pronounced, to the extent that it's approaching zero net demand on the grid once we look out over a 20-year time horizon. And if that wasn't enough to show that we're in a completely different paradigm, have a look at South Australia, where the current forecast is that there will be a net negative load on the grid. That the solar PV across the grid will actually more than offset all demand within the South Australian grid. This is the sort of future that where we are now looking at. And that is a key challenge, not just for the system as overall, but also for the networks. Now, overlaying the impact of variable generation that we've just described is the long-standing variability that's associated with demand, of course, significantly greater than the variability of renewables. And that's something that we've learned to live with. What we need to now adapt to in an equivalent amount of generation. So I think the case is fairly clear that even with the trends that are currently forecast and expected we are going to have some major challenges that we need to address in the realm of decentralised energy. However, there are one or arguably two additional wildcards that could have played. As many people would have noticed over the last 18 months, we've seen an unprecedented string of monthly global temperatures exceeding the previous record for each respective month. And this has happened as we've reached the first time a global agreement involving all countries to commit to reducing carbon emissions to keep the global temperature rise below 2 degrees and preferably below a 1.5% degree rise. With also a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 and 2100. Now, we haven't got the policy in place to deliver that yet, but it's plausible that within the next 5 to 10 years we will see effective policies to do that. And if that happens, we will probably see not just the rapid increase in renewables take-up accelerate, but as indicated here on the pie chart on the right-hand side, a much greater emphasis on energy efficiency that Quiet Achiever in the decentralised energy space, which could further reduce or further accelerate the reduction in demand on the grid. So what does this all mean for our sector? What does it mean for the project that we have in hand today? Well, clearly output generation, and that's going to be complemented by a greater geographic diversity of net demand and generation. And we're going to see radical shifts in local supply and demand patterns. Now, in order to respond to that, means we're going to have major changes in price structures, both positive and negative prices. We will need much greater tapping into flexible demand and much greater local solutions to address those local shifts in supply and demand. And in order to achieve that, we are going to have constructive customer and utility collaboration, as well as some significant regulatory reform. Now, we're not going to talk about the regulatory reform today, but the essence of this project is to try and facilitate that constructive customer and utility collaboration through the provision of accessible, timely and relevant information in the form of the network opportunity maps. And for the importance of this is underlined by the fact that networks comprise between 40 and 45% of our total electricity bills, and to date have been the bulk of the network, the infrastructure spending within the electricity supply system. So if we're going to address these issues, we need to address them in the context of the networks, and that's where mapping has such a key role to play, the local character of those constraints and opportunities. So to summarise then, we're moving from a context of centralised generation, equally from centralised control to much more decentralised control and coordination, from a paradigm of demand forecasting to forecasting and demand management, from a paradigm of building least cost infrastructure to ensuring a least cost mix of supply and demand resources, and from relatively little engagement with customers in relation to network development to extensive engagement with customers in order to tap into that demand side, both directly and through the retailers and decentralised energy service providers. And in order to do that, we need better information and effective collaboration. So next slide. Just to perhaps make this a little bit more concrete, I've got typical examples of the sort of thing we're talking about at a local level. This is the Magnetic Island Solar City project, which was a project that was intended to address rapidly rising demand on Magnetic Island, which led to the imminent need for a third undersea cable at a cost of $18 million. But as an alternative to that network infrastructure, ERGON Energy, in collaboration with the community and customers, invested in efficient lights, energy audits, and solar PV and smart meters. And in doing so, cut peak demand by more than 40% and cut energy consumption by a similar amount. And in doing so, deferred the need for that $18 million investment by at least 8 years. The overall cost of that was $30 million, which is a bit more than $18 million, but we need to remember that this was quite explicitly a demonstration project. This is just a little graph that shows the impact of the project, and the blue line represents how demand has declined in response to that project, while on the mainland and nearby it continued to go up. So then to take the next step beyond that, the engagement of the networks can facilitate a more focused and more cost-effective approach with the MACKAY constraint, which was intended to defer a $36 million network investment in the area around MACKAY. And they did this by targeting network capacity incentives within a particular geographical region, and in order to achieve that deferral. They ran a program called ERGON Incentives, where they quantified the value, deferring that investment, and offered incentives in order to achieve it to the marketplace and thereby to customers. So, in wrapping up then, what we're trying to do through this project here is demonstrate a mechanism to facilitate this sort of collaborative approach to win-win outcomes and sharing of benefits through supporting decentralised energy and non-network alternatives as a complement to network investment throughout the NEM. Which brings us to the project itself. So the project is essentially trying to answer, the network opportunity mapping project is intended to answer these three critical questions. Where within the electricity network are the most cost of centralised energy? How much could decentralised energy be worth at these locations as an alternative to additional supply expenditure? And what are the key years and times of constraint in order to address those constraints? And that's why we've created. So they're essentially a resource to show where and when to target the development of renewable energy and decentralised energy options, and to do so in a centralised resource that is annually updated through a streamlined process that is easy for the networks to participate in, that's consistently applied across the whole national electricity market, that's freely available online, and crucially is woven in to the demand-side engagement strategy of the network businesses themselves. The project is funded primarily by ARENA, but also by the New South Wales Government, ERGON Energy and UTX itself. The formal network service, the NSP partners are ERGON Energy, Electronet, Transgrid, and I should also mention the Energy Networks Association. The data provision and collaboration includes all of the network service providers within the NEM, and CSIRO's Data 61, formerly NICTA, Australian Renewable Energy Mapping Infrastructure Portal. So we're at this point in the middle of the arrow here now with the first full iteration of the maps. There were sample maps released last October, but this is essentially the first comprehensive maps that you're seeing today. And the second full iteration is planned for next May, June next year. There's also going to be an update in September once we've got the more up-to-date information from I think you'll see all of the information about data once we demonstrate the map. So I'll skip over this one now and pass over to Ed Langham to give you a demonstration of the maps. So in doing so, we've actually got a bit of a recording that we're going to run through.
We have said live online, but for the risk of technology failure, we are actually got this one. Make sure that we're running through the maps on the ARIMI platform. So hopefully the audio and visuals should work smoothly. Thanks, Chris, and welcome to the first full release of the NEM-wide network opportunity maps. So we are going on Data61's Australian Renewable Energy Mapping Infrastructure platform, which is available at nationalmap.gov.au/renewables. And it's been around for a little while. Recently had an overhaul of the user interface and it's looking absolutely fantastic. It needs a modern browser to make sure that you're getting the most out of it, and we recommend that you open it on Chrome if you do have a choice. So the thing is, there's much more data on this platform than just the network opportunity maps, and if you can see that it brings you up by default to Australia, and you can click on Add Data, which will show you an entire data catalogue, which has not only electricity infrastructure, but renewables and other infrastructure, cadastral boundaries, topography, so a whole lot of things broader than just NOM, but this is what the network opportunity maps is what I'm going to be focusing on today. So anyone that's actually played around with ARIMI will see and understand that we're really entering a new era of data accessibility for third parties and market participants. And in terms of network data, the network opportunity maps are really the first step in this process. I think there's some really additional fantastic things that can happen in the future. So to find out on that infrastructure, then a flag of ISF, and we have 4 layers. The first one of which they should be viewed in order, ideally the first one of which is available distribution capacity. So here you get a bit of information about the layer, the description of the data, what it does and doesn't show, and any disclaimers. So we're going to add that one to the map to have it come up. So you can use a whole bunch of different base maps. You can click on the map. This one here is the default of maps aerial with labels, but there's also some other ones you can use if you so prefer, and you can do it in 2D mode if it's running a bit slowly, or with a little flashier. Now, so you can see this has brought up the ledgers on this side, and it shows you that the available distribution capacity is effectively the current capacity of the network assets minus the forecast demand. So what it's telling us is what the capacity of the existing network assets are at the zone substation level to meet forecast load growth over the coming 10-year period. And you can see a whole bunch of these funny shapes that are covering the eastern part of Australia. So this is coverage of the national electricity market, and these shapes are actually the zone substation service region boundaries. So they're tiny in urban areas, maybe a kilometre, or areas perhaps a couple of 100 kilometres across in some instances. And as you can see in the legend, what this shows relatively intuitively is that where there is green, we will see that there's sufficient capacity within existing network assets to meet load at that particular point in time. Where there's red, that's where there's a capacity shortfall and an impending need to do something about it, either a network augmentation or a demand management or local generation project to alleviate that constraint. So what this doesn't show is the capacity available to actually connect distributed generators. That's a slightly different thing. There's a lot of interest in that from stakeholders, and it's something that a lot of network businesses are talking about at the moment. And I think, we'll likely be working towards having that available before too long, but it's not in the scope of this project. So the observations with this particular map, and just a reminder to everyone online there, you've got a panel on the webinar where you can actually submit questions. So anything that you see or is confusing or anything that I haven't mentioned, please do type your questions in there and we can either respond individually or pick some of those questions up in the Q&A. So some observations about this particular map. There is a lot less red in these maps than there were 5 years ago. Essentially that is relating to substantial investment in network capacity that happened in the previous regulatory period in 2009 to 2014. It's also occurred at the same time as network load growth has tapered off as the industry's come to better understand the implications of energy efficiency and local generation in affecting those forecasts that were pretty high. So to have a look at this map properly, we're going to go into Victoria, which probably has the most interesting visual situation, largely due to assets, the network assets being run harder under probabilistic planning criteria. So more risk is accumulated before the investment takes place. So you see, you see more orange and red colours in this particular map, to be illustrative. So we have a time slider down the bottom here. You can manually use it or you can hit the play button. So what I'm going to do is hit the play button and then slow it down a bit so you can see that there is available capacity in some areas and not in others. And as you go through time, load growth starts to affect that capacity situation and you start getting more orange and more red as that risk profile accumulates in different places. And we can pause that sort of later in the timeline to the extent that you can see year out in 2024, quite a lot of red and orange in certain zones. And if you would like to know more about a particular area, it's not just the colours and the shapes that you can see, but you can actually, if you're interested in Ballarat, you can actually click on Ballarat, find out information as a power core zone that has a summer constraint, and look at the growth rate and its available capacity profile and how that declines over time, and start looking at risk accumulation in sort of 2020. So there's a whole raft of information for every one of these zones that you can go and interrogate if you're looking for prospecting for specific network circumstances relative to a project that you want to do. So we're going to come up here to Sydney to see how this same map looks in Sydney circumstance. The maps are very large. There's a lot of data on them. So the process of working around them can be slow sometimes, depending on your network connection bandwidth. But just a warning, you can turn it on to 2D if you need it to run a little bit quicker. So we are now looking at sort of the greater Sydney available capacity situation, and if we play that same slider bar, we can see, let's speed it up a little bit, we can see that there is load growth occurring, but far less than the circumstance that we saw around Melbourne, in part because of the larger amounts of spare capacity from that network investment that occurred relatively recently. But you do see load growth causing some constraint, and it's not so much in the centre of Sydney, but around the outside in the growth corridors, such as sort of Parramatta and Penrith and Campbelltown. And if you want to, again, find out more information, you can look at this Penrith situation and see up from 2017 onwards, see what that looks like. So that is the physical situation around available capacity. So that's our first map, and we're going to now look at some others. To actually look at additional maps, I'm going to remove this particular layer. You can use multiple layers at once, but it can get a bit messy, so we recommend just turning a layer off and then turning the next one on. So here we have proposed investments. So this is a point file rather than polygons. You can see a preview here. So let's add that proposed investment to the map. So looking at here, we can see that the nature of the shape. So it tells us what type of investment it is. If it's a circle, it's an augmentation investment usually. There might be some other categories here like connections and things as well, but generally augmentations. And if it's a hexagon, then it's a replacement investment. And this is an increasingly important area of investment for network capital plans because it doesn't go away. It's dictated by a dedicated lifespan of a piece of equipment. So we can see that in Sydney there are a combination of replacement and augmentation investments. The colour of the shape indicates how imminent that investment is. So if it's out in the future, the green dots suggest that it's not, and the red ones are things that are occurring quite soon. So, and wherever you see a grey one, that tends to be where a commitment has already been made to go ahead with the project, and there isn't really much opportunity to do anything about it at that point. So that's usually when the commitment period is in the past. None in this particular view, but you'll see some elsewhere in the NEM if you look around. So looking at the biggest dot here, so the size of it indicates how big the investment is. We can click on the biggest dot to see that that's the Powering Sydney's Future project of Transgrid, which is over $400 million, relating to some cable replacements which occur in 2023. A whole bunch of information here about that, and you can find out more information from demand base that you can link to from here if you need to know more. So, and we actually see that load growth situation in Penrith that we were just looking at earlier with the available capacity mapping, it actually appears as a $28 million augmentation investment in 2022, driven by a summer constraint. And there's network support that's required down the track in about 2023. So you can start to see these, the capacity situation translating into certain investments and follow the story through. Now, so that's the proposed investment that's designed to sort of alleviate some of those constraints we saw earlier. And then we actually take both of those pieces of data together and create what's probably the most useful map for most alternatives, which is this one we call annual deferral value. So I will add this one to the map. And what this actually shows us is the value of deferring that proposed network for a period of a year. And to show you what is actually happening behind the scenes, click over to PowerPoint here, where I've got a slide that shows you the calculation. So we take the proposed network investment, the number of dollars, so that's the size of that dot, and then we take the cost of capital, so not having to finance the project, and then avoid the depreciation on the asset build, which tends to be a few percent a year. Between the two of them, it's around 9 or 10% of the proposed network investment. That's sort of the value pot that could be deferred by not building that project for a particular year. But that deferral is predicated on actually getting an appropriate amount of demand management, which is where the load growth comes in here. So for the support required in each year, that's the pot of money is divided by the amount of support that's required to achieve the deferral, the annual deferral value of dollars per kVA per year, as you see here. So going back to Google Chrome, plays out. So this isn't what the network business is willing to pay for demand management, but it does show the marginal cost of the preferred network option, which gives you an indication of the upper limit that the network business could invest in demand management and actually still save money for them and for consumers. So you can see here there's sort of a hotspot categorization of the different values, and there isn't anything in 2016, and that tends to be because those projects have been committed and can't be avoided. But they do appear in the year that proposed investment would come online. So let's play and see how it goes over time, and you can start to see these different opportunities popping up as those particular investments occur in some of these fringe areas around Sydney in particular. And until we get to about 2023, and a whole bunch of different opportunities line up, and we can pause that and then go in a little further and sort of investigate those. Now, the value that you're seeing is mapped to the zone substation area, but it actually includes all of the value of the upstream levels of the network. So it includes transmission and sub-transmission as well, wherever there is a deferral value. It just passes them through and represents them visually at the zone. So you can actually see here in the center of Sydney, there's a whole bunch of zones that are the same color that are orange that have this $50 to $150 value. And if you want to find out what that is, you can click on it and you'll see that it's the Clovelly zone, but it's actually value passed through from the Transgrid Powering Sydney's Future project, which is in 2023. So that's why all of these connected zones have the same value, because they're all picking up. Demand management could be effective in any of those places to defer that particular constraint. So that's how transmission gets passed through and sub-transmission. And then there's ones here, again, looking back to that Penrith hotspot, it's some very high values there. We can see that that is actually investment at the zone level, energy, and you get some very high values in excess of $500 per kVA per year for that particular opportunity, with a relatively small amount of MVA required to defer it. So very interesting opportunity from a non-network perspective. So that is what these maps look like in sort of the Sydney zone. As you zoom out, you can start to see areas of larger rural areas where there's transmission lines and things that are constrained. And you also see over here, and I'll talk about this later, is an opportunity in Kangaroo Island. But I'll have a specific presentation on that. It's another interesting replacement opportunity. So let's remove the layer and then add the peak day available capacity. So essentially, augmentations in particular are really about meeting network capacity on the peak day, and constraints generally only occur for a few hours. So it's actually really valuable to show the timing and magnitude of the constraint that occurs on the peak day itself across 24 hours of the day. So you can see this isn't a full data set because it depends on what data each business has available, but we're hoping to build this into a full data set over the coming years. At the moment, we've got a pretty good coverage, and let's have a look and see how it looks in Melbourne as we zoom right on in. So we can, looks very similar to the last peak day map. In the green areas have plenty of capacity at that particular time, and red's when the constraint starts to occur. So let's play. You can see that our timeline isn't years anymore, it is hours. So starting at 1 AM, and we'll play this through the day. We'll slow it down a bit, and you can see there's plenty of capacity in the night, of course, and it's not until you start to get work hours coming through that you start to see some industrial zones lighting up, some commercial zones lighting up in the middle of the day, and then say by 2 PM you have a mix of residential and commercial zones that have a constraint situation. And if you were prospecting, for example, for a demand management program that may be related to a particular constraint, let's look at some data here in Craigieburn, which is a fairly industrial area. You can see the geographic region and the particular facilities that sit within that area that you can target for a program, and you can find out exactly the time of day that you would need to be delivering support, which is between, when capacity goes negative, between 11 AM and 4 PM. So you start to get a picture of what your solution looks like relative to the network problem. So that is the peak day available capacity map. And there's a whole bunch of other features on these maps, as I mentioned, with other layers. I'll just sort of allude to them. I don't have time to go through them in detail. But let's remove our final layer. And closer look at other pieces of information you might find valuable. So proponents are really interested in where the transmission lines are, for example. So you can see, click on here, see there's a line file across Australia, and we can add transmission lines to our map, which is an F. And we can zoom to the full extent of that map. We can also add things like substation locations, not right down to the distribution level generally. These are the larger substations. So you can see where those are, which might be useful for connection points. You can also then do a bit of prospecting relating to your specific renewable energy resource, look at mean wind speeds at various heights, look at bioenergy resources, cropping practices, biomass, to really start to get this data to talk to each other, to give you on developing non-network alternatives, which is incredibly powerful. Okay, so really the potential there is endless, and it even has the capability to drag and drop your own spreadsheet data over the top of it. So if you have CSV files or Excel files that you can drop into the browser, you can actually see your own sort of private confidential data displayed in the same place, and then you can work with it as well. So it's pretty compelling, and there's a lot of potential there. And if we wanted to share this, for example, and show stakeholders this particular set of layers, you could easily just click share here. It saves the view and the zoom extent, the layers that are selected, and you can just copy and paste that particular extent so that you can communicate something specific. Or you could even embed this within their demand web page, so they could zoom to their particular region coverage and have available capacity or proposed investment or something turned on to be able to communicate that this map is there, and we can link to it and get some great usership. So it's super simple, takes only a few minutes, which is fantastic. So okay, so now I mentioned that I would talk about Kangaroo Islands. So I'm going to flick back to our case study in the PowerPoint. You can see how this Kangaroo Island opportunity, you might be thinking, that's all very great. I've seen some nice pretty pictures, but what impact are those maps actually going to have that are out there now? And so I just wanted to give you a concrete example of an opportunity that's happening now that wouldn't have happened or got to its current status if I focused on it. I think Kangaroo Island, you can see how it looks in the maps down the bottom right here, and we were made aware of this project as we were scouring the new South Australian data for this new release of the maps. And what we saw was a great opportunity to utilise the fantastic renewable resources of the island to follow the path of King Island and others to look at largely renewable-based self-sufficiency for the island. So, it's around population of not huge, around 4,000, a peak demand of around 8 megawatts or so, and there's an impending cable replacement of $45 million. And obviously there's additional costs associated with purchasing energy for the mainland, but this is at a RIT-D process at the moment, which closed about a month ago from SA Power Networks. And there's some fantastic renewable energy resources on the island, and we've gone through the process. This is some really early results that we presented at the Energy Networks Association conference back in May, but we've done more detailed work, so it's going to be released very soon, so watch this space. But what we've actually found is that there is a really attractive non-network solution option that is a combination of wind, centralised solar PV, distributed solar PV, battery storage, energy efficiency, the full gamut of opportunities, standby generation, and potentially biomass if you wanted to go 100% renewable. But what we actually found is that the indicative cost of these options was about the same as the network opportunity, but it meant that the operating cost of some of these technologies was invested on the island an extra $1 million or so per annum on the island, savings to Kangaroo Island customers from the demand side opportunities of a few $1 million a year. new renewable energy certificate revenue from that clean energy generation as well. So some really interesting things here. And what we think is, if there is a more cost-effective renewable energy and demand management solution here, where else could there be? And imagine if these opportunities were routinely identified and actually had the spotlight of market innovation focused on them. So these maps are really intended to drive that network and market transition in the coming years. And sure, this Kangaroo Island is a specific case, but every case is specific. And if we see one or two of these opportunities popping up and being viable, we could see hundreds of these opportunities cropping up around the country. And finally, I just wanted to show you how the timeline, project timeline associated with a RIT-D to one of the key limitations of the RIT-D process, as many stakeholders identify it. You've got an investment decision and a lead time, that's numerous years, and the network option is looked at a long time in advance. But then the non-network option, it really only has an intense period of market activity. This one, 90 days during the middle of this year. But if under a network opportunity map scenario, you would actually, rather than just having 90 days of market activity, you'd have a whole bunch more foresight and have network businesses being able to communicate directly and starting those conversations with non-network service providers to actually come up with coherent, combined, effective solutions much longer in advance, and not have us in a position where a RIT-D, the non-network options don't get up given a lack of time to do so. So that's pretty much it from me on the maps, and I will pass back to Chris.
Okay. Well, thanks, Ed. That was a great introduction to the way the maps, as people can see, there's a huge amount there, more than you can absorb in a little webinar like this. So now we want to open it up to Q&A. We've got a few questions that have been asked along the way there, but we can also, if you want to raise your hand, and there's a little button on the control panel there, which indicates you're raising your hand. We can unmute you, and you can also ask questions. So, Edward, I see you looking across the list of questions there. Are there any there you wanted to address straight off the bat?
Okay, we have a couple of quick ones to kick things off. We had a Samantha McGann has a quick question that should be relatively straightforward. I will, Samantha, I'll just unmute you and we'll see if the technology is going to play with us.
Coast only highlighted. Are you going to be giving that data for the Northern Territory, WA and South Australia?
Very good question. And at the moment, so South Australia is all there. It's just that most of it is uninhabited. So in terms of, so hopefully everyone can see Google. We didn't focus too much, but hopefully everyone can see it on Google Chrome. So that essentially the populated areas of South Australia are fully covered. So effectively we're getting everything that is formally in the NEM. But yes, the two questions around Western Australia and Northern Territory are open. Western Australia does actually map, has quite similar maps. Western Power does, and they map the available capacity over the coming 10 years. And that's actually also available through this mapping platform. I'm actually not 100% sure how to get there off the top of my head. We can send it to people later, but that is something that is available already, and ideally we would like to merge those two data sets and start that conversation with Western Power about how we actually get one consistent data set, getting WA in the mix. Having said that, the Western Australian maps don't have the full set of layers that you've seen here within the network opportunity maps. So it's there's capacity there. I don't believe there's any annual deferral value or peak day available capacity. On the other hand, they do have something that these maps don't have, and they have in that they have connection capacity
and that's something that would be nice to add to the network opportunity maps, but it's outside the scope of this project. So that is the capacity to connect generation to the grid. And for Northern Territory, would have love to have them too, but again,
there's no plans at this point to add NT, and if anyone's particularly keen or has useful contacts or in that sense, please let us know. Okay, so got here is from Charles Yu. So I'll see if we can find Charles and unmute you, Charles, if you'd like to ask the question that you just posted. Not sure whether or not Charles is in a spot where he can actually ask the question, but the question he's asked is it possible to add another layer of info for average energy consumption in SA1, in say SA1 level? And so this actually came out at the Clean Energy Council launch last week. We had a panel session and Data 61 and Energy Networks Association and ourselves, and what came out really strongly from that is that the next step for this platform and this data to really increase its power would actually be better understanding demand, better understanding energy consumption and building up a picture of that. So that is definitely on the work program, and just figuring out the best way of doing that. So if there are any data providers on the line, and that's their data sets that can be added or can be made of Data 61, would definitely be keen to hear from you to be able to make them available. So sorry that we couldn't actually get your voice on there, Charles. But we also have.
I might flag while you're bringing up the next one, Ed, and by all means get ready to do that. But perhaps after the next question, I noticed that we've got a couple of representatives of the networks who have been involved in the development of the maps, and I should note that this project would have been completely impossible without the incredible amount of time and goodwill that's been brought to it by the network businesses themselves, and we are really very grateful for that support that we've had, which has been but in recognition of that, there are a couple of people who have been involved. I'm thinking of Peter Cole from the Energy Networks Association, and we also had, there was another one member, Craig Tupper, I think, may be there. So if either Craig or Peter would like to offer a comment from a network perspective on where you see the value of the maps, I'd encourage you to do that. But while you gather your thoughts on that, I'll come back to either of you in a moment. Was there another question, Ed, that you wanted to?
There is a basic clarification that came from Chris Leonard, so I'll actually just address that one quickly. It's just around what the actual boundaries of each of the parcels of the map that actually corresponds to the screen in front of us. These zone feeder regions, if anyone missed that, that wasn't necessarily here at the beginning. So what we actually see is at the zone substation level, all of the geographic areas that are connected with feeders underneath that. So those are very small in urban areas, a few blocks across, and then huge in the rural areas. So it's just the service territory at the zone substation level. You could produce these maps at a more granular level, down to the sort of 22 or 11 kV feeder or even below, and what that would mean is this would just look a whole lot more granular. There would be sort of an order of tens or hundreds more polygons underneath it. Okay, all right. Well, I might throw Craig, if you're available, if we can unmute Craig Tupper from Ausgrid. One of the feeds so Craig, would you like to comment
either on that question or more broadly on the role of the network to be this value in the map.
Thanks, Chris. It's actually Rachel Williams from Ausgrid. Unfortunately, Craig's had a bit of a sex change today. I guess we see the benefit in releasing all this data as kind of a market engagement or a stakeholder engagement activity. In the past, I think there's been criticisms about demand management as run by the networks has not been transparent enough. And I guess we see this as an opportunity to disseminate more information to the market, able to get the most value back, and not miss opportunities because there's something that was available that we didn't know about. At the moment for Ausgrid, we don't have a lot of investment opportunities where demand management looks like it will be cost effective, but we are doing quite a few projects in the kind of market engagement space to try and build up our experience of, you know, a rapidly changing market, and to be able to roll those in when we get opportunities going forward.
Great. Well, thanks very much. Feedback throw to Peter Cole, I think is online, hopefully. And apologies for not prepping you people beforehand, but if you don't mind just me inviting you in to make a comment. Peter, has DNA been very
my comments will probably echo that, is that I think the future of the networks is collaboration with customers and other stakeholders, and getting this information out there so that things I suppose that you know I'm aware of is that most of this information is already available from the individual network service providers in their planning reports, but it's never in the same format and may be difficult to find. So to bring this into a common format across the NEM, I think is a great innovation for anybody to, you know, anybody out there who wants to access it for any purpose, to be able to see it in a common form across the whole country effectively, or across the main parts of the country at the moment. And I'm sure also it's very convenient for the networks themselves that I'm sure they're using it themselves to get a visual indication, you know, using the mapping project of their own data for their own purposes. And I guess the point we should make is that we have been to senior management of all the network service providers we deal with, and asked them about their support for the project, and we've pretty well got everybody on board. So as a result, we see that they're going to be continuing to provide the data needed to keep these maps up to date into the future. So yeah, I don't think I can add much more.
That's terrific, Peter, and it's good to have that feedback, and I think your last point is quite a relevant one, and one we'll probably come back to towards the end of the discussion. That is the future of the maps. This is as we said in the introduction, it's a 3-year project to establish the maps, but it's intended to be an ongoing resource, and ensuring the continuity and sustainability of the maps is crucial to the project, and that just would not be possible without the support from the network businesses, and that support that ENA is providing and facilitating is critical to the future of the map. So again, thanks for that. Were there any other questions there, Ed, that we should address? And people, anyone putting up their hand?
There's no hands currently put up.
You need to tell people how to do that.
Yeah, if you're confused, there is a little sort of hand symbol somewhere on the other side.
It's right here, underneath the orange arrow. There's a few logos, and on ours it's about the 4th or 5th one down, I think. Where is it?
Oh, it's not on.
Oh, okay. All right. So if you see a little hand with an arrow on it, if you click on it, should put an arrow going up, and we can respond to that.
Now there is I'm not sure if I will. I think your audio on the telephone, so I will unmute your telephone access and see. So Sarah, you should be online if you're able. If you want to ask your question.
So my questions were about concentrating solar thermal power, whether it was actually part of the project, and whether you've got the DNI data to support that, but also what the CST potential for Kangaroo Island was.
Yeah, so this is really comes back to the reason we put this on the AREMI platform. So neither of those things, like at the moment, the network opportunity maps are not sort of technology specific in any way. We're describing the network situation and not necessarily the solution. However, stakeholders wanted it in the place where they could do that, and we've so if you were wanting to find out that information, then you would where you could look under electricity, under renewable energy resource. You've got direct normal exposure for solar generally, which you can preview and turn that on. The ISF we've done a little while ago. If you click research, and hopefully everybody can see this, and it's called Breaking the Solar Gridlock. So we could actually have looked in the past at the extent to which you could get firm capacity from concentrating solar thermal with storage of storage that the facility would have between 0 and 15 hours at a particular time of year, be it summer afternoon. So if you were looking at even a winter afternoon constraint, and you wanted to know what was the situation with 5 hours of storage, you could turn that particular layer on. It's been a bit slow, but you should be able to see everything up there for the national electricity market. I'm not quite sure whether it covers Kangaroo Island exactly, given it's just offshore.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be near enough.
So it'll be pretty close. So yes, that information is there, and I think it's only the.
Are we waiting for that to load now, Ed?
We should be, but it's not. So I'm not sure if I just didn't quite click.
Add to the map.
There's a couple of ways you can add to the map. So hopefully
here we go.
There we go. So in this instance, if you're looking at a winter constraint, which probably isn't realistic, but you would find that the resource there is not super fantastic for Kangaroo Island, 0.66, like 60, 2/3 chance of availability. Whereas if you were up here sort of north of Adelaide, there's even on a winter afternoon constraint, you're looking at sort of
up to Whaler.
Firm capacities that are matching network assets in greater than 90% probability of availability, even at a time when solar is not supposed to be that strong. So really interesting stuff there. Okay. Now I'll just hopefully that answered your question, Sarah. I'll see if we've got any more hands up.
Did Sarah want to follow up on that?
Yeah, did you have any further clarifications on that, Sarah? I've just unmuted you again.
No, I'm sort of in a meeting room with a couple of other people, so we're sort of discussing that and sort of the granularity of the squares there and whether it gets close to, or what the distance on those squares might be.
Yeah, well, anyway, happy to have a conversation offline afterwards if you did want to talk about it. It was a combination of work done by ISF and University of New South Wales.
But just from the point of view of the particular constraint in Kangaroo Island at the moment, Kangaroo Island has a really exceptional wind resource, so it would be hard for concentrating solar thermal to compete on a cost basis with the wind resource, I would say, at this stage, but particularly as there are not a lot of those facilities established in Australia at present. But I think solar rooftop and small-scale PV has the advantage of being able to be established very quickly, probably quicker than CSP as well. So there's a bit of competition from other renewable resources on Kangaroo Island.
Now I'm just going to toss to David Griffin, who has a question. So bear with me for a minute, David, while we unmute you. Okay, you should be unmuted.
Hi, I was just wondering when. Sorry about that. I'm just wondering when capacity at substations for new generation will become part of the mapping.
Sure. Yep. I'll just mute you again so that we don't catch your dog any further.
And also, David, I think you've got the mic or the speakers on your computer. So we were getting a little bit of feedback. If you mute your computer and listen through the phone, then we won't get that feedback. So just to answer.
Yeah. So on the generation capacity at substations, this is I think the time is right for this information. So it's currently mapped at the zone substation level by Western Power for the Swiss. It's not in our maps at present, but there were conversations at the Clean Energy Summit launch from some of the transmission providers, Powerlink and Transgrid, I believe, were looking at making that information more readily available, in large part because it's more efficient from their perspective to actually just have it out there rather than fielding individual inquiries about it. It's something that we're actually pursuing through the technical working group for this project at the moment about how we go about developing that layer. So this is the one that says, well, how much distributed generation can you connect at different points of the network? And so we're looking for collaborators to do that. So yeah, if anyone is on the line that is interested in that, that's certainly something that's highly likely to be pursued within the next so hopefully that helps.
And as I said in my introductory presentation, we expect something in the order of 5,500 megawatts of new renewables, largely wind generation, to be brought online in the next 5 years. So if we could streamline the process of people understanding where the capacity is to connect, we could make that a more cost-effective outcome as well. Any comment back? So does that answer your question, David?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Oh, good. Thanks, David.
All right, we don't appear to, let me just double check, but it looks, so if anyone else has any further questions, we have a couple that we can respond to individually. And we'll just, so if anyone else has any further ones now before we go on to the future of the maps, we do have one here by the looks of it from Tim Ryan. So Tim, I will just unmute you.
Thanks for raising your hand, Tim.
Hi, I was just wondering, two questions. First, the network, local electrical trading and network electrical distribution charges, what's the likelihood of those coming to being useful in the maps as far as the networks are concerned? And the other thing is, at the moment, you've only got South Australian information for diesel generation. Do you have any information for other states?
So on the second point, the South Australian diesel generation information, no, it only exists there. I'm not actually aware of anyone that actually has a coherent, consistent data set for that outside of SA. I think ERGON Energy's got a reasonable understanding, but that is something that if you're wondering about when or how that might be able to become available, then please submit some feedback through the feedback tab of the AREMI platform, because Data61 are always keen to know what, so just for everyone's sake, you can see give feedback in the bottom right of the screen, and so you can ask any information about future data sets and things to them directly through there. And just
be clear, that's to Data 61, not to this webinar.
Yep, not to this webinar and not to us.
Yes.
They're the ones that manage the platform. You asked a question about local network charges and local electricity trading, and many people on the line may not know what those what they are, but there's some concepts that the Institute for Sustainable Futures has been pursuing through a different project, and there is actually a rule change out at the board at the moment by the Total Environment Centre, the City of Sydney, and the Property Council of Australia on local network charges, and that's sort of trying to determine the value of distributed generation to the grid, and trying to credit that to a distributed generator to make sure that they keep their exports and on the grid and being able to serve local customers rather than just going keeping their load behind the meter and keeping their generation behind the meter. So that particular project is local network credits are really they're defined as a less spatial measure. So really they're about capturing the average and long-term value of distributed generation. So there's no reason that through a tariff mechanism, a network business couldn't offer a local network credit, for example, and actually bump it up or have a higher value in an area that was constrained, and that would be a fairly neat mechanism to do that. And that's one way. So ERGON offers cashback incentives. An alternative way to do it would be through a tariff, like network credit. So they're distinct and different mechanisms, but they can play together if network businesses want to go that way. Okay, now I'll just unmute you, Tim. Does that answer your question?
I know, I've got generators that are connected to the grid and they've got off-grid approval, so I'm in New South Wales. I would have thought off-grid, for example, would have had all the data that's actually connected to the grid already. Is there any chance of getting that sort of data online?
I could ask Rachel, given that she is here. Let me see if I can unmute Rachel and see if she can answer that for us. That had better be our last one before we finish up. Let's find
Craig. Yeah.
Rachel masquerading as Craig. Rachel, I just unmuted you. Do you have an answer?
Did you get the question?
Yeah, to be honest, it's not in my area of expertise, so I'm not entirely sure what the possible, is it about connected in with which parts of the network, or is it specific generators' contact details you would want?
I've unmuted you again, Tim, if you want to clarify.
It'd be a bit of both. Ideally, yes, be able to know what generators were there and be able to talk to them, but I would have also, apart from my own personal interest to what the opportunities might be around that, is that I would have thought that having details of generation systems that are there would be useful for people looking to expand opportunities or otherwise.
Yeah, well, I have to say, as I said, it's not in my area of expertise. So if you'd like to get in touch with me, and I can forward that through to our generation connection kind of experts, I'm more than happy to see what I can follow up for you, and in the information that we can publish about our customers. So that's a bit of a concern, but as I said, I'm happy to follow it up on the Ausgrid website. If you find the demand management mailbox, I'm happy to take a question and run it within the business to find someone who really is an expert on this.
Great, we might wrap that one up there then, and Chris, I think, should we?
Yeah, should we push back to the presentation? If there are any final clarifications from people, we can take that at the end. thanks, Rachel, for that response, and thanks for the question, Tim, and for everyone. Obviously, issues of customer privacy is pretty paramount, and I know that in conjunction with Trans, we've collected quite a bit of data about the potential for local generation around the demand management and planning project about, well, must be almost a decade ago now, but is obviously a key issue that needs to be dealt with there. So the frontier, I guess the next steps, which is not so much the frontier, but in wrapping up this project, this point to get the first full map out there is a major milestone. It's we're really pleased to have reached this point, and as I said earlier, couldn't have done it without the support of many partners, including the network businesses and the ENA. So again, thanks to all of our partners and the funders and the rest. But our task for the next 12 months, as we move towards the second comprehensive network opportunity maps, and all about securing the continuity and sustainability of the maps. So a key next step is a collaboration with the Energy Networks Association on an ongoing basis, as Peter Cole mentioned earlier. So that's a key element in the next steps. Another key element is securing the future host for the maps, and this is the maps, as Ed said earlier, can be used by a whole range of parties, whether it be networks or AEMO or government agencies or others, to share the data and to present the primary map. But in terms of the key hosts, we've got a couple of offers there at the moment that we're working through, particularly at the moment around parties like AEMO and the Energy Networks Association. So we hope to define that fairly soon so that we can work with that host the next iteration of the maps together. Then beyond wrapping up the project itself, as I said, the middle of next year, there are certainly plenty of opportunities to provide maps by including other data. For example, we're starting to show replacement expenditure as well as augmentation expenditure on the maps. So we hope to increase that in future, even though it's not strictly within the scope of the maps, and hopefully we can get a standardised process around that and the potential for non-network options to provide alternatives for replacement expenditure. There's also an interesting element around the idea of presenting the reliability criteria, particularly around the probability calculations around the value of what they call unserved energy. That is the likelihood of there being a on the grid, which leads to a loss of capacity and therefore loss of supply for some period, associated with the value of that lost load or the impact on the customers. If we could start to map that risk, which exists throughout the grid now and is managed on a day-to-day basis, no grid or element of the grid is 100% reliable, otherwise the whole system would be completely unaffordable. So if we could start to map that risk, that would, I think, also be a valuable data set for alternatives to the grid, particularly as in many cases decentralised energies can be cost effective at a smaller scale than large network investment. That's another area that would be good to explore in future. The next slide is around, relates to resource overlay. So a few people on these. around where the location of existing distributed generation, etc. We would love to be able to map other resources on the map. A lot of them, as Ed already mentioned, are there in the background on a REMI, but the potential for electric vehicles, for PV and storage to be mapped as well, other distributed generation, and importantly on the demand side to be able to map the potential for demand response to reduce load, as well as energy efficiency potential, could really deliver a really rich additional layer of understanding for the maps. We've also already touched upon the issue of distributed generation connection capacity, and one we haven't touched upon but which will be increasingly important with the emergence of more grid at a local level is voltage management conditions, because there's the scope for solar PV, for batteries, and for demand response to address not just the overall capacity on the grid, but issues around voltage conditions as well. So there's no limit to the potential for information, but right now our focus is on the here and now, and ensuring that the market becomes more aware of the resource that is currently there. So we encourage you to spread the word about the maps, and if there's feedback you'd like to give us, we'd certainly appreciate that. That's about it. Were there any final comments from you, Ed, or from other parties that?
Not from me. I'm aware that we're about just over time. So, but I do have a hand raised from Prem Pamakera in the Victorian Government. So I'll just unmute Prem. Hopefully you intended to raise your hand, didn't accidentally press it. So, Prem, do you have a question?
Sorry, Prem, we can't hear you at the moment. And we have unmuted you, so it might be a problem at your end. Perhaps you could type a message.
Could have been accidentally pressing the button as well. So.
Yeah. Okay, well, we might leave it there. As Ed says, we are slightly over time. With that, we'd like to say thank you very much for making time to join us for the launch of the Network Opportunity Maps, the first full set. We hope it's been a useful session for you, and we're keen to get feedback and work with you in ensuring that more people are aware of the maps and that they are used to facilitate an efficient and collaborative decentralised energy future. And with that, I'd like to thank Ed for his great contributions, and the rest of the team at ISF who also made a massive effort in providing this for you. And with that, I'll wish you all a good day, and talk to you next time.
Thanks very much, everybody. We'll sign you out.